Today we're building an AI translator app that translates the text in the selected languages and also has a speech-to-text functionality. Once the desired languages are selected, user can type in the text, click translate, and the translated text will show up on the right side. We can also enable the microphone. Hello, how's it going? My name is Judy. That will transcribe the text and then generate a translation. What's different from other translations is that we can store the translations best for learning purposes for users to quickly look back on. And we have an authentication system. I can sign in with my email and password. Then I translate a new text and save it. During the tutorial, we will set up a database using Neon so we can store and examine data using their SQL editor. And for managing users and sessions, we'll set up Clerk that also has this dashboard and comes with ready-to-use React components for authentication-related activities like signing, redirect, and functionalities like protecting routes for unauthorized users. So only logged-in users can see and access this My Translations button that redirects to the page that displays translations. Those translations are grouped by languages. For generating these translations, we are using Gemini API, and if you're somewhat new to full-stack development with Next.js, this is a perfect opportunity for you to sharpen your skills, as we'll learn how to integrate AI in the application, create API routes, server actions. We'll have both server and client components, and in the end of the video, we deploy the application, so it's ready for everyone to see. Alright, and we're going to get started by creating a Next.js application. If you're not familiar with Next.js, it's a full-stack JavaScript framework that uses React, but does provide some additional features. And to create a Next.js app, you do need to have a node installed. So if you don't have it, go ahead and install it now, preferable version 18 or higher. And then we're going to use the command npx create next step latest. Here goes the project name, and we're also going to use npm. We're not going to use this example. We're just going to build the one from kind of like a scratch. Latest, I'll name this AI translator. Then use npm. So it would install create next app. If you don't already have it, press yes. And we're not going to use TypeScript for this one. ESLint, yes. Also for Tailwind, that would be for our CSS. Let's put that in source directory. And finally, yes to the app router, no to TurboTax, and no to the customizing import aliases. All right, so this is installing the dependencies. That the packages are installed, let's navigate to our project folder. And I'm inside here. I'm gonna open it up in the VS Code. I use the command code that, but any ID should work fine. And let's quickly examine what's going on and how does the file structure look like. So we can see the list of all the dependencies as well as the scripts on how to run the application inside package.json. We have Tailwind configuration in case you want to add some themes or like styling that applies to globally all the components. And then here is configuration on which of the files this Tailwind configurations should trigger work on. And we have a source folder where goes all our code and logic. So moving on from the configurations to that, we have a page which once I'm gonna run the application, it's like a home page, and that's how it looks like. As for the public, we use this folder for like assets that could be available publicly. This is the node modules that we just installed when we run the installation command. And yeah, git ignore includes all the dependencies that are not committed to the git and stays private on your computer. Okay, so now here in the VS Code, I'm gonna open up the terminal, and like I mentioned, we can see the script inside package.json file. So I am going to run the start like a dev command that's going to start up our local environment, npm run dev. So it will start, it'll give us the port localhost 3000. This is where it's running on, so we can navigate to this page and see how our application looks like. And we have this very minimal code here, and which we can change it by going to page.js. So I'm gonna open this to the side. And we don't need all this extra code, so let's remove that. And that would be, first I'm gonna completely remove the footer, which is this links here. And then inside the main, there's like images and some divs that I am going to remove. So instead, what I'm going to add is a text area. This is where the text would be stored that would contain the text the user wants to get translated. And then we will have two of them. The other one would show the translations. And so let's save that. And now we can't see, so if I click on here and actually start typing, this is text, it would get updated. We just don't see because it doesn't have any border or anything, but we can add that. Same for like this one. So to change the styling of that, we add classes, right? And then we add the class names. The way we determine where to add class names from is following the Tailwind configuration. So for example, if we hover, our parent div does already have styling, and if I examine like what does grid mean, it would show in CSS that it's like display grid. Minimum age screen, minimum height is 100 VH. And then if you want to browse the correct class names that are different from what I'm writing here, then you can check Tailwind documentation. It contains all the styles that they provide and the utility classes. But what I'm gonna do here to add the border, we can just define the border, but I do like using Tailwind because you can just directly use the classes. You don't have to write like a CSS specifically for separate components. So let's give it a border. Border color, I'm gonna do slate 800. Let's save this, and we would already see that the border appeared here. We can also make this corners of the border rounded, so doing rounded empty. I'll add some padding. Let's do 4. And yeah, that looks better. I'm gonna copy this and do the same for the other text box that we have. And instead of having this in a one at the top, one at the bottom, let's make them side by side. And for that, we're gonna wrap them in another class, and we're gonna make this class flex, but instead of column, let's do flex row, which by default it should be. So if I enter and save it, we would see how this got updated. Oh, instead of class, I should do class name. Okay. So we want now to have like a gap in between these two. We can either add a padding or directly on the parent class. We can add a gap, something like 4. All right, and below this, we adding a button that would be something for translate. Class name, let's also make padding 4. I'm gonna make this rounded medium. And the background of this, let's do also slate and yeah, 800. Since we're making this slate 800, it would be darker. So we are going to, so that the text is visible, we're going to make the text white. All right, I feel like the padding is too large, so I'm gonna put it down to 2 for the button. And yep, that's the button. It doesn't do anything here, but it does display the text. Indicate which language we're translating from and to. We can add a span at the above the text area that would contain like the language text that shows us which language it is. So if we do it this way, then this would get added, but if we wrap them inside a div, let's do container and let's move this. By my extension that I create these classes with, it should always be class name when we're using Next.js, not the class. They're different, so let's like standardize them. I'm gonna make this containers also flex, same for this one. And change the direction. So if we do column, then this should move up. And let's do the same for this one. Okay, and instead of just having the text here, we want this to be dynamic so that users can see the list of language options that we have and select the ones they want to use for translation. So to do that, let's create a dropdown. And for the dropdown, I'm going to create a new component. Inside the app folder, I'm going to create a new folder separately just for the components that we can also like reuse. That would be a good practice. And new file dropdown.js. So it would be a component, like a functional component, just like a function. So if we were to do export constant dropdown that equals to, let's not add any arguments for now. I'm just going to return like a paragraph that says English. I will take this dropdown, copy it, and for this one to show up instead of, let's just change the text because we'll languages dropdown. Save it, and what I'm gonna do to use this component that we just created on the page is we need to import that and display it inside our JSX. So because this was not an export default, we need to use curly braces, name of the component, and then we indicate the folder path. You can also use, this is the configuration that we set in the beginning for the aliases. So if we were to do in the app, then go to components, then go to the dropdown. So here we have that, and to add this in the JSX, kind of like a syntax that we use would be like this with the tags. Save this. Now this should instead be using the component functionality of the dropdown. We can create a dropdown using a select tag, which is like a built-in HTML tag. I'm gonna remove this language label. We could have a label that contains text, but I don't think we need to. It's pretty intuitive what this is for. And instead we can map out options. So if I add something like English, and let's do the value for this one to be EN, like the language codes. Then if we do another one for French and another one for Spanish. Let's save that. So if I go ahead here, we're going to see that this dropdown appeared and it would open up and show us the list. And once we select something, it would automatically update here. This is great. Now let's update the styling of this select, adding a class name on the select tag, and let's do rounded medium. I'm gonna add border to be input. I think this should be set as like a gray color. So if we do background same color as the background that we have, then let's add a padding at the on the sides to be 3 and a little less padding on the top and the bottom. So we're gonna do that at the as 2. Also on the focus, let's add, when it's focused, let's add a ring, and we can select this color. I think that, let's see how it looks like. Oh, we need to add the border class. We want to apply the border. Okay. Now let's add margin at the bottom to be 2. And the width, I don't want the full, so just the fit. Consider once we have multiple selects on the same page is that to uniquely identify the select, we need to add the names, because right now the value of the selected language, for example, is stored in the select. So like React needs to know which value belongs to which one, and we also need to access that value later on. So for example, for this one, we're gonna do language from, but instead of having this hard-coded, since we want to reuse this component, we're gonna pass the name from the props. Also, what we're going to pass is the value, because we need the access of the value of the language from the parent container that would be doing the controlling, in this case, page, and also on change function. So for example, right now, if I were to set the value to English, it would always stay, and I don't pass the onChange function, it would always, you see how it got updated to English? If I even try to select Spanish, it would still stay English. And what we're doing here is it's called controlled input. We're controlling the outcome and the value of the input. All right, so instead of this, let's pass value to be coming from the props. Same thing for the name and on change. So the way we access, before I pass on change, I'll show demo quickly way we access this value inside would be we take the event, which is usually like a on change, and then we, for example, let's do console log for now, event.target.value. So if we were to save here, we're gonna get an error because we didn't pass it, and also we didn't turn this into a client component. So once we have state updates, controlled components, such events, we need to take our component and add use client at the top. That will make it a client component, because by default, coming from the page, the components are server components. All right, so let's examine console log. If I were to do this, it got updated and we received this French, Spanish. Cool. Also, what we're gonna take from here is options. So instead of having this hard-coded, we're gonna take the values and we're gonna name the text field itself label, and we're gonna map them out. So options.map. Once we map out things, we need like unique keys. So I'll do like index. And then we're gonna do option value equals to option.value. Then we take option.label. And also key equals to, so if we use index here, once we do the map, what index does is starts, first value would have 0 index, then 1, 2, and 3. But if we use the same indexes, since we have 2 selectors, then we're gonna get a conflict because the key should always be unique. So what I'm gonna do instead, have a combination of 2 things. One would be the name. So these 2 selectors have different names. I'll use that. And I'll combine it with the index. Okay, and we don't have this. We're not taking in anything. So That's why we're getting an error, and we're gonna pass those arguments in a minute from the page. And change. Okay, so let's define those. Close this out. So this is where we have the drop down. Let's define a constant language options, and it would be an array. It would contain objects with a value and label fields. So label is what like would show up. And let's do 3 of them. I think yes. All right, we're gonna take this. Inside the dropdown, the way we pass props is we call the props name. So if it's options, we take options and we make it equal to our local value to the page here, which is language options. Okay, now for the name and the value, these values would be changing, right? And this is where the state comes in. We can store them in a state and easily update them. And to use states on the page, we're gonna make this also a client component. Then let's import useState hook from React. And create the state, and let's name this language from, then set language from. That would equal to useState. Let's set a default language, let's say like English. And then second state for our second dropdown, right? So this would be language 2. Set language 2. That would equal to useState. And let's do Spanish. All right. Set language from, that would be our value. As for the name, it could be anything else. I'm just matching the same name of the state, but it doesn't have to necessarily be that. All right, and another one that we need is a onChange function, but if we directly call the onChange here, that would not work because it would try to set the whole event as a state, because that's what it is getting from. So what we can do instead here is we can access the event, and once we call the onChange, we can instead pass this as an argument. And let's do this. Let's write a function that's gonna handle a language change. So we're taking the value and it would call this hook. And we'll need 2 of those. So this would be from language change, and it would set language from. And let's pass that as a onChange. All right, if we save this now, and we open up this, we're gonna see that we have these values that we just passed from the argument from the parent, but also hard-coded ones. I'm gonna remove the hard-coded ones, and we can see that this works. So if I select Spanish, it would update that value to Spanish, French. All right. Let's do, so now we have a reusable dropdown. We can do another one. So replace this French one, but instead I'm gonna do this language 2. So the value we're gonna update to language 2. Options, we're gonna keep that same for both. And handle language from change. This function, we didn't write it yet, so let's do that. Yeah. Copy this, paste it, and update. let's save that. Paste it. If I go here, I would be, okay, so default we had Spanish for this one, right? Okay. Let's reload the page. So when we reload the page, the state gets cleared out. So this both gets set to their default states. Now, if I do Spanish, this would get updated. If I do this one French, this would get updated separately. Okay, so now that we are done with the selectors, we have access to them, we have functions that control and update them. Let's move on to this text areas itself. And first thing that I'm going to add in each one is like a placeholder. So first one would be for something like enter text to translate. And here, translated text will appear here. Right, this should just show up. And let's also update the width of this on maybe like larger screens, set it to I think 400 would be better, and I'm gonna add that here. Large, since it doesn't fit on all the way through medium. Okay. And once we, okay, so we updated just small styling changes, but let's also capture the value of this input once the user starts typing for the first text area, creating a separate state for that input state. Let's name it actually input text. All right, let's do value that equals to input text and handle input change. Here we can take in a event. New text would equal to event.target.value, and for now we're not doing the translation yet, so let's set input text to new text, and we're taking this function and pass this also text area, similar to how we had on the select, does have this onChange prop as a default, but it's optional. Once we add that, we can save whatever is entered here as a input text state. All right, so next on for the translate, once the user enters the text, they click translate here, another text will show up here, right? And this would be translated text, so let's prepare that as well. Set translated that equals to use state, also by default empty. I'm gonna copy here and paste it. What would be different for this text area is we're not gonna pass the onChange function because we don't want users to type it in. So we can even add this as a, let's see what the errors, read only. So yeah, let's set it as a read only field. Okay. Great. So on the translate, which would be kind of like if we think of it like a form submission, we'll trigger a translate function, which we're gonna write it. But for this to be triggered, we can make this button type submit. And we need to wrap this fields inside a form. So let's start with what do we have here? The first drop down, the second drop down, and the button. So if we do somewhere here, and after the button, we can pass action to this form and we can access the fields and then call the translate function. And for the translate functionality, we are going to be using Google's Gemini API. Gemini does come with like a free tier, so if you sign up for Google Cloud, on their pricing page you can see like for different models they have different kinds of free tier, but for this use case, which is fairly more simple, you should just be able to use that free tier. I already have the created, so I'm not going to click here, but if you do, it will generate. You can copy the value, and then in the root folder, we're going to create a new file, .env. So here, all the variables here will not be committed to the GitHub or where you're storing your code, and also you need to keep secure, not share this value with others, and so that if it ends up on the internet, then someone might use it to, and then your build might wreck up. So Google generative. So Gemini has two, generative and then Vertex APIs. So we're going to use generative AI API key, and in here in the quotes, paste the value. Okay, and we can take a look at how we can generate this content, and we're going to be using the documentation for the Node.js, and there is like a module that we can install. I believe they also come with an API, but since this module is already set up, it would be, and we just need to call like a function, it would be easier to use this. So let's go ahead and install this one right here into our project. I'm going to open up a terminal, add a new tab, and npm install name of the module, Google Generative AI. So once that is installed, where we're gonna call this would be inside actions. So we're gonna create a server action because we want this to happen on the server side, because we don't want our API key getting exposed to the client side, and usually for interacting with the API, it is a better practice to do it on the server. And the way we do that is that we can, inside the app folder, create a new folder only for the action, so that we have this two separated, and then create a new file for this translate function, JS. So we have to make this a server component, and we do that by adding use server at the top. Then we define a function. So this will be just like any other function. Since we need to wait for the response, we're gonna make it an async one. Async function, name of the function, translate text. So let's taking the text, I believe it would detect the language where it's from. So we don't even need to like take that in, but target language, let's do like language from, but we can make this optional. And by default, we can have like an empty string for this. And now what we can do is we're gonna import this first at the top, so we have access to it. Then we're gonna create a new instance of this Gen AI, and we're gonna replace this API key with what we named our variable, which is Google Generative AI API key. All right, let's save that, and So then we need to add a model. So we're gonna use 1.5 Flask-like. So let's add that. So for the constant prompt, if we do have this language from defined, then we're gonna tell it, but if we don't, we're gonna ask it to detect the language. So language from, and then let's construct a string. So this would be translate from language from to translate the following text from this language to target language. And then here we pass the text. All right, if not, detect the language of the text and translate it into target language. And one more time we pass the text. Okay, so then I'm gonna add an additional prompt, because sometimes the answer, if you tried, for example, like ChatGPT or something, it would be like, you would add explanations. For example, here is your translations, or I detected this language, etc. So let's ask it not to do that. Just return the translated text. Do not add additional descriptions, such as, I think you'll get it if I ask for this. Here are the translations. All right. We have prompt, we have our additional prompt, and then let's get the result. And I'm gonna copy this whole thing. So prompt, I'm gonna add additional prompt in here. So this is just like one argument, one string. We wait on this model we call generate context function, and then this result, when it comes back, we access the response and the text. We can call solog, and then also let's return result response the text. Here's like other, I guess, values that we have access to. And then we can also use, so this is function just for the translation, right? But what we can do is when we, inside our form, I'm gonna open that up here. If we pass like an action, we can also pass the form data from this form. So there's two ways we can either just take those state and pass it to this function, or we can pass the form data, which usually on server actions, we do pass the form data, and then that one accesses the fields and passes to this one. So that, let's also write that function. So this one we need to export, and it would be async function translate. It would take in form data, and we're gonna access the text equals to, so from form data, the way we access values, we don't just write like text. We would have to call get function and then pass the name of the variable, which is text. Okay, so now we're gonna do the same for target language. And language from. So let's return the translation that equals to await translate text and pass this value. So first we pass the text, second target language, and then third language from. Finally, let's return the translation. And also, before we do the await, if there's any issues, we can also add like a try and the catch scenario clauses. So console log and catch, console log if there's any messages. All right, we're ready to import this function into our page. And this would be at the top. Let's do import translate. This should be from app actions translate. So we won't update this value yet, but let's just see how first, like the value here, that would be the next step. Let's just see how this translation works if we integrated it correctly and so forth. So action that equals to async, we're gonna pass form data. It's coming from the form. And then constant result equals to await translate form data. Let's just console. We already do have the console log, so I don't think we need, just save in case. Makes it to the client side. All right, I'm gonna save this. I'll also add a padding when we edit type submit somewhere there. Margin at the top went away. What's there? Set input. Oh, it should be set. Where is it? Text. All right. Hello, how are you? Let's translate. All right, and here, let's move this and then return. We need to name this text area text to be accessed to be able to access the text value inside here. Do hello world. We do see the translation here. And what we can do to display the translation is, first we can just, when we call the form and we get the result back, we can update the state and set translated text to that result. That way it would show up on the right side. So if I try one more time, oh, it's an object. Oh, the translation field. Okay, now we can move on to the audio piece of this, in which we are going to add a functionality like a voice recorder that'll record the audio from the browser, and then provide, first we need transcription of the audio and then the translation. We'll add it somewhere around next to the translate. So let's create a new component for that. Inside components folder, I'll add a new file. We're gonna name it voice recorder .js. Creating functional component, giving name for now. We're not gonna pass any arguments, let's first write the functionality for the recording. So what do we need here is a state, so we can store the current file of the audio as well as the state, whether or not the recording has started. And I think that's about it. We'll use useRef because to record the voice, we can use the input like from the forms. But we would also have to make a reference to it, and let's do use state for the state. All right, creating is recording, set is recording, and this would, by default, this would be false. Then a state to store the audio. If we take a look at the Gemini documentation, we're going to see that for sending the audio, we need it in a format base64. So that's what we're going to try to save from here. By default, this would be null. Then we're going to create a reference to the media recorder of the input that I mentioned, and useRef for this, also null by default. And finally the chunks, because the data comes in chunks, so let's do reference that equals to useRef, and this would be an empty array. For the icons, we're going to use Lucid React package. So we're going to install the package and then we can browse from, they have a lot of icons. So if we do like a mic, we can use something like this and we can see or like copy the component name. And we're also gonna do square. And then this is like, you can customize this with like Tailwind. So install the package, npm install Lucid React. And this will start installing. Then we can import those two that we're using up here. So going to JSX, let's create a div class. Inside the div, we are going to add a button. And depending on the state, let's check if is recording. Then we display square. And then if not, it would be mic. We can save this. Let's add that into our page. I'm going to import from components voice recorder. And I'll add that right next to our drop-down translate button. All right, let's see. Wonder why it didn't get updated. We do, oh, we have a default. Cool, all right, let's move this next to the translate, and then for that we're gonna wrap this two into a, let's add a flex class, flex direction row. I'm gonna save this. All right, and then item center. And then this will make like this flex itself, so that's how it's gonna center itself. Let's just add gap, maybe 2. All right, going back to this one, adding a class name. On the main div, we're also going to make this one flex. Items center, maybe add the padding. As for the button, we're gonna add class name we'll make it like square size, so width 16, height also 16, rounded, full, circle. And let's update the styling based off if it's recording or not. So I'm gonna turn this into a string, this, and here check the condition is recording. Then we're gonna do background red, let's do 500, and then text would be white. This would change the color of the icon. And then if not, let's leave it as is. And adding this, so making sure that they are of the same size with, let's do 8, like half of the parent container, height also 8. All right, it's too big. Let's actually make it so this is 2, maybe like 4. Same for this one, and then I'm gonna add a border to this button class. And it will be same color, yeah, as the borders of the input. And maybe we need to add like a flex on button class as well. Justify content, justify center. All right, and so that it's kind of closer to the size of the translate, we're gonna update this to be 8. That's too small. Okay, 12. Great, and the button here has a margin at the top because this don't look like centered, and I think that is why. Okay, so now let's update the state. When we click this one, it should set to is recording, and we're gonna create a function for that, name it toggle recording. This will take previous is recording state and set to the opposite of it. So yep. Adding that as an on click. All right, now this is the state. Oh, is this inside? Let's do the type of this as well, because I think it thought it was a submit button and it kicked off the translation. Interesting. All right, I'm gonna class, where's this class name? Oh. Add that hidden input field that I was going to talk about. I was talking about that will hold our audio files. Type for this would be hidden. We will give it a name, audio, and the value would equal to the state that we created, or if the state is empty, then empty string. Adding an area label. All right, and then this should be part of HTML, but we should not be able to like see it on the UI. Let's start writing the start recording function, which would also handle saving the data, and let's also the chunks. So this would be constant start recording. We would need to use like a web API, part of web API, which is like media devices and the function get user media to get that media from the browser. And because we're interacting with that, we're gonna make this function async, and let's do a try and a catch. If there's any errors, we're gonna console error that and something like and what the error is itself. Okay, so this will be a stream, and that equals to await. Navigator is a class that has this media devices. Then we have get user media, and let's set to audio true. This would make it where the part where it asks user if it wants to share, they want to share the audio, and then we do take this media recorder reference, and we set it to new media recorder. So when the data becomes available, we start pushing it to the chunks ref, which is basically like an array. So just like we would push data onto an array, we would do that onto here. So this would be current on data available. I'm just trying to make sure the spelling is correct. We take in an event, and we just check if event.data.size is more than 0, then push event data onto it. So what happens on the stop would be we're going to take this chunks reference and then convert into the format that we need to send it to the API. So we take media recorder reference current on stop is like one of the listeners that we can call when it's stopped, and save this as a blob first, and then using the file reader we can like convert it chunks ref. And here we can indicate the format that we want, I believe. So yeah, we can do this one, for example, in the type. Create a new file reader. Read as data URL. When it finishes loading, then we can save it as this like constant. Let's name it base64 audio. That equals to reader.result. So take the result, and then using the hook, update the state. We're just gonna, I think usually there's like a prefix, so we are going to remove the first element, split at 1. All right, and then we update the reference to an empty array. So once we have all this loaded, we can start the recording, And this is where we set is recording to true. And we'll take this, and instead of the toggle, what toggle would do is check if it has to trigger this or not. So if is recording, we're going to write another function to stop the recording. Here, and then else be to start the recording. And for the stop recording, it'll be more simple than that one. It would be if media recorder reference current, and let's make sure it is actually recording. Then we can just call this media reference and then current and then function stop. And we update the state. Set is recording to false. Okay, that should be everything. Let's try it out. Same, it asks me if I wanna allow to use my microphone. I would say allow. And it does show the microphone is in use, and I will click this and it would stop recording. And before we send the data, let's look at some of the considerations. One is that we can't generate audio with Gemini API, so that's why on the other language side, we're not gonna have an audio that we can play. Also, it does only infer responses when it's English, the audio in text and speech is in English. So for that, to make sure that users don't try to like record any other language, what we can do is, if it's set to a different language, we can hide this. And we can do this from the page itself, where we have the voice recorder and the state also for the language. And this would be language from doesn't equal to, well, it equals to English, then display. Let's check it out. So if I set it to Spanish, it should disappear. The styling should not change. What did we have here? I think it was the padding and the height. So maybe I'll just set the height of this div right here to just be 16. And now it should bring it back. So to send this audio file in a request, let's create an API route. And to do that, inside the app folder, we're going to create a new folder. This is by convention. If we want to create routes, we have to name it API. And then inside this, we're going to do a new folder that would be the name of the route. For example, I want to name this transcribe. And then where the logic goes is the route file itself that is named route.js. So for routes, they pretty much work as a functions. The only difference is that we have to name the function based on what we want the request method to look like. So I'm gonna make this a post method, and then what we'll do to access the data from the request is gonna be, we're gonna use form data, and this would be await request.form data. So once we get the form data in, we get the specific file that would be audio file, and that the name of the value is audios. I remember And to double check that, we go here, and that's the name. Okay, so then we do this piece, which is calling the Google generate content function, but instead of passing the text, which we previously did, we're gonna pass the audio file. I'm gonna take this variable here, replace this one, and the type, we can also like check the type and pass that, but this is the type that we indicated in the input field. Instead of summarize, we'll do transcribe and console log response text. Since this is an API route, we have to resolve the request, so we have to return something as a response, which we're also gonna need on the client side. Let's do result. Actually, we can just do this text. That'll be better. A try catch, so if something goes wrong here, we're gonna return that error as a response. So if I wrap this in, actually this one, try and JSON, and then we're just going to send the error. Okay, now that we save this logic that we wrote, if we were to call localhost 3000, which is where we're running our application, and then API transcribe, we make a post request, then we would be able to get a response from here. To import generative AI itself on the top. But as for the use server that we had in the server action in the API routes, it's assumed it's on the server, so we don't need to be defining that. And also for this one, call the API URL inside our voice recorder component, and we're gonna call it when it actually stops recording. So here we load the audio and we add that to the state, and we're also gonna send an API request. So for that, let's create, prepare the data, create form data that equals to new form data. And then we add as a field audio. I'm gonna take this, paste it in here, and get the response. So we have to make this async, since this would be await fetch, then pass the URL, which is API transcribe. And the fields, first one would be a method post, then we have a body, and we pass form data that we just created. Okay, get a result that equals to await response.json, and before we add this anywhere, we're just gonna console log audio uploaded successfully, and the result. Right, let's save this. Let's open up a console and test it out. Let's say, I don't know, hello, how are you doing? We are recording a tutorial. Also have like an accent, so hopefully, okay. So that is the result. Great. We got it back, and now we can update this to be placed here, and then translation to be placed here. And because the states for these two tags are controlled from page.js, we are going to pass a function as a props from page to the voice recorder, and then voice recorder will update the language from. And then in this component, we're gonna do the translation like we're doing with like the manually typed text. So let's take language, not the language from change, the handle input change. Actually, I'll write a new function because this one takes event as a target. So constant we're gonna set this to the new value. All right, and we need to add this on the voice recorder inside the props handle set text. And once we get the response, we're gonna use that here. Result. And it's a JSON object, so it would be result dot result. Hello, updating the text to be translated from English to Spanish. And for translation, we'll use the same server action that we used before in our form. And for that, we need to, before we call that, prepare the form data, because in this case, form is directly passed from the input values, but in our case, we don't submit the form. So adding form, creating a new form data. Then we need to pass the fields. First we do text, that is we get from the value here. Then we need to add language 2, which would be the state language 2. And we do language from. Now we call the translate function, pass our newly created form data. After that, we set the translated text to the translation coming back from there, and field translation. Okay. Hello, 1, 2, 3. Okay, text here, that's our translation on the right side. In the next part, we are going to add saving translations functionality, so that users, when they come in, they write the text and they get this translation. If they want to later come back and check the list, or maybe they're learning a language, they want to look back all the words that they want to have a reference, that would be what this functionality is for. And we would need to create a database to store this data. We will create a Postgres database. It would be behind the scenes, Neon would be hosting it. And the steps would be like creating a project on Neon, then we will add the dependencies and we'll add the queries to save the data, and also then later on load the data on the application. So this is the npm module that we need to install to be able to run these queries. I'm going to go ahead in the terminal. This command, we are going to install the application, the module into our application. And then the next step is to create an account on Neon so that we can get the connection string. Once I created an account, I was redirected to this projects page on the create a project form, and I'll add a project name, AI Translator. I'll keep NeonDB as database name, and let's create the project. I will use the default settings, and we would get a Postgres URL. Actually, if we go to the Next.js version, it would give us like an example of how we would use in server actions, and then in that env it would give us a snippet that we can just directly copy. Command tab back to our application, open the env folder, and below our API key, we're gonna add the Neon configuration. And there's different ways we can fetch and mutate the data. Examples here are of server components where we can fetch the data, or server actions which could be executed on the server, something like this. And when I first saw this syntax, I thought of like SQL injections, but Neon has this blog that explains why the SQL template tags are not vulnerable to this kind of like attacks. And I will also, if you want to go over the blog post, I can let me know and link it below. And let's use this example. We already have a database URL. This would just check the version of the SQL and to make sure that we have, set up the connection correctly. And for that, what I'll do is inside the app folder, I'll actually create a new page. To do that, we need the URL. So a new folder, I'll name this translations. And a new file, page.js. Here I will paste what we copied, and this is basically, first we have the import of from the module that we just installed. Then we have a function for getData, which initializes a Neon instance using the database URL that we saved in our environment variables. Then we define what kind of query we want on this line here, and we return a response. This is for the component itself. We create a page component, and on the load of this is a server component, because as you can see, we created directly in the app directory and we didn't add the use client keyword, and then we display the data. Yeah, and then similar to how we created this home page here, this is also a component. Okay. And if we were to navigate right now, translations, here we get this printout. That's the data coming back from our query. Next steps are to define a schema, which basically defines a structure of a database and how data is stored. Since we're using the Postgres database, we're going to have tables, and if this were a more complicated use case, I would probably go with like an ORM to manage interactions with the data, like queries, and also keeping track of the schema, which would then be in the code. But since this one is a fairly simple use case and we would only need the translations, we can run the schema changes right here from the console inside a schema editor. And if we take a look at this one, there's like an example that also like creates a table and I guess inserts a few fields from it. But let's, instead of creating this one, we're gonna create a tables, and before we create a table for translations, we're going to create a type of languages as an enum. So what it will do is anytime we assign a language to the translation, we would have like the type options to pick from, so it's easier to like search any translations based on a specific language, and also to store those languages. All right, so here are the options, and this would be what we currently have. So English, let's do Spanish, French. Oh, okay, so we got the statement, that statement. Oh, we got a notice that statement executed successfully. Let's create a table for translations. User ID. For user management, we are going to use an authentication. In the app, we'll use clerk. So user IDs would be, we're not going to create a separate table for users in here. Users IDs would be coming from there, and that would be, I think clerk does the type text. Do need this one to be not null, because if there's no user, we don't know who this like translations is for, so there's no reason to save those. And for the translation ID, it's going to have a unique ID, serial. Let's do primary, make this one a primary key. We need comma after each line. Then we add a source language. This is where we're going to use our newly created enum. We'll after have target language, also language enum, source text. So the text in which the source language that was initially written, this would be just of type text, and translated text. Okay, run this. Let's run a query that will add a single translation into this table. So we'll use insert keyword into, then comes the table name, which is translations. We define the fields that we are inserting. It would be user ID, which I'll just like come up with a random text, since we're not using like actual user IDs that we have of the stored users, since we haven't set up that part yet, followed by source language, target language, source text, and a translated text, and defining values after. So I'll just do one for user ID, English for the original language, then Spanish for the translated text language. Then let's add the text for English and a one for Spanish. And let's run this one. Oh, I didn't finish the... Alright, this ran successfully. If we wanted to now check and just return everything from the table, we would do the select and then star, which means all from translations. If we run that, this should return in a table format our data that was just inserted. On now to the authentication, we're going to, as I mentioned, use clerk. I'll add the link in the description as well. And a clerk comes with like a lot of functionalities out of the box, so we don't have to worry about, for example, like storing passwords securely, because it handles that. Also, it does come with like components in React, also that works with like Next.js, that we can just like plug it in our application and use it. So for that, we need to, once you have your account set up, navigating to the dashboard and click create application, which I just did. I will only use email for this one, but you can add all the sign-in options. But let's create and I need to add a name, AI Translator. We are adding this in Next.js, although we are using npm, so that is what I'm going to add here in the terminal. Let's copy that. Then inside our env file, we need to add this. It comes with two environment variables. One is the publishable key, which is, as you can see, started with next public. So that key is public, and then we have a secret key as well. I'm gonna go and paste those values in my env file. So next step is we don't have a middleware file, so we're gonna create that, and we'll add this code right here that sets up a clerk middleware and then configuration on like what files should be skipped and on what files we should run this clerk from. And we do use the source directory, so we're going to create this inside here. And we don't have, we're not using TypeScript, so we're going to create JavaScript. All right. This is an example of where we want to use clerk functionalities. We have to first wrap the components where we are running this clerk with this clerk provider wrapper. And then inside here, we can easily use sign in, sign out, and all the other functionalities. And this is an example for app router. It does also work for pages router. And the reason we're doing it in layout is that it would run on any page that, for example, would be in the same folder. For example, here we have a layout folder, a layout file in the app, but if we wanted it to only run under subdirectories of translations URLs, then we would create another layout.js file here and then add those clerk provider in there. And so creating the new user, the step is just we navigate to localhost and create a user and just like sign up. This in action. First, I will copy the import statements and going to our layout. Let's close the terminal, add this at the top. Then we have an example of sign in, sign out buttons and children. We're already displaying children on the page, so we don't have to update that. This is where the children are. I will create a header tag in here where I'll add these buttons, and let's go back to our application and see. I did forget to add. I did talk about adding the provider all this time, but I myself didn't add that. Let's place that here and close it out. All right. Just gonna load this, and here at the top we see the sign in button. Let's click here and I will create an account. So once we add the email address and password, we click continue. It should redirect to, oh, okay. I have to make a different longer password. Let's click continue. It will send a email and I can paste the code and it will redirect to application where we have this logic here, also of user button. So that it's what it's showing here. There's like a manage account and sign out button as well. And besides having just the buttons to sign in and sign up, throughout the application we do have access to the information like if user is signing or not. And we're gonna need that when we add the save functionality here. So if user is not signed in, then we would prompt them to sign in. And if they are, then we would actually save the translations based on their user ID. So let's add an icon for this save functionality. I'm gonna look up something that looks like a bookmark. Copy the component name. I will go to the components and create a new component, separate component for this. So if we do a new file and save translation, and it would be a button, so .js. We'll make this a client component. We will use a use user hook from clerk for the user related stuff. Create a button, not adding props for now, and to access the data is loaded and is signed in. So this would tell us if like authentication is loading. This will tell us if user is signed in or not, and we can even get the user data like this. Use user from this prompt. So in terms of display, we're gonna return a button in both cases. The only thing that would change is the functionality of the button. And I did copy this. I never actually pasted this here. Gonna make this bookmark, and let's do on click. So if it's not loaded, if it's loaded and okay, so let's do console log for now. We're gonna import this save button into our page, not of the translations. We're going to come back to this translations page, but of our translator itself. Save button from and let's add that right next to maybe language 2 drop down. Right, and what is the error that we're on a misspelled on click. So let's open the console, test it out. If I press this one here, I do get out. So this was the before the previous error message, but if I click here, I'll get signed in. And let's do the button type one more, not to confuse with the submit button. So type equals because it tried to submit the form and okay, so signed in. I'm gonna sign out right now and not signed in. Take a look at the clerk documentation now, specifically the redirect to sign in page. There's a method that comes with this auth helper that will help us to redirect the user to the sign in page, but we can use this helper that returns the auth object only on the server side. So that would mean either route handler, component, or an action. Since we are already in a client component, then we could create a server action and we can trigger that on the bookmark on click. So I would go in the actions, create new file, and do save translation .js. Export async function save translation. I think here was an example. So let's import the auth at the top. And we can actually directly also access user ID. I was thinking of passing the user ID as a function, as an argument, but I guess we don't need to check that on the client side since we also have access on that from the server side. Okay, so this would be if the user ID is not there, then redirect to sign in. I will copy this function, paste it in here. Replace logic with our function, save all this, going back to our application, let's test it out. Oh, it's not a default import. Deleting that. And yeah, we got redirected to the sign in page. I'm gonna sign in right now. The query to add the translation, and similar to what we did, I guess the insert piece, if we were to copy this, and add that in here, but we're not going to just directly add this. So if we look at also the exam documentation of Neon database, we will see how, let's say, the variables are pasted. This is kind of like a template literal, and we just paste the variables, and then these variables would be coming from, so user ID, we already have access to this one, right? And then, so let's just replace this one with user ID, and the rest would be passed as an argument to the function. Source language, target language, source text, translated text. All right, we also need import statements of Neon at the top. And let's just see how the response looks like. So after we check if the user ID exists or not, and await SQL, and then we create a template. Literal, we put this inside. And we surround our variables with this. We can console log the response for now, just to test it out. And yeah, that should be it for in terms of changes of the server action. So here we're calling it, but we need to pass the arguments. So when we call this, we do like this and create like a callback. For testing purposes, I'm gonna hard code and try it out, passing these variables first. So it'd be English, world, let's see, and the console log we're gonna get on the server side. So let's see what that prints out. If I were to click here, it comes back as an empty array. I guess this was insert into, but we can go back to our Neon console, view all translations. Run this, and we're gonna see that the new row has been added, even though wait, what happened to the values? Oh, this is an object instead of just passing it as an argument. Okay. Try one more time. If I run that, okay, we do get the values here now. All right, let's pass those in here. Source language, target language. And going back to the page where we have this, it's like a parent to this button. First, I'm gonna move this to the right side here, and we have this inside the drop down. So if I do this as a flex, and justify between, so it's spread out. Where did the flex class go? Okay. Language from, language to, input text, and translated text. Okay. Input text and translated text that equals to, believe these ones have the same name, okay. All right, I'm gonna close this other files. Go back here, update with this values coming in as parameters. All right, and then we can remove this extra code here. Okay, so I will do then let's try French now. And I will not read this out loud because even though I do have some years of studying French, my accent is still probably terrible, but here is our translation, and let's see what's up with the translated text because it should be there. All right, so this part seems to be translated text. All right, let's go to the save button. We have target text. That's why. It's interesting that it did not throw error, but I guess it's because we're not using TypeScript. That wouldn't be a scenario. Let's manage the state of the isSaved from the page, and that would be our home page. We already have useState here, so we're just gonna add a new state. Is saved, set is saved. By default, this would be false, and it would get set to true once it is saved from the button, and we're gonna pass this state also to the button, so we update the CSS accordingly and write the function for like setting the is saved. So that would be or let's name this on save. And this would just call and set the is saved to true. On handle save, sending on save, and also the is saved. Adding those props in here is saved on handle save. Class name equals to, if it is saved, then we do fill yellow 500, otherwise just leave it as it is. Let's do btn classes for the name, and I'm gonna copy this. I will paste this in here instead of, I'll replace the class name with that. Sure, it should get updated to this. All right, let's add the toggle functionality itself. So this would be async await save translation, and then we just call on handle save. We also have to update where it gets reset. So if user translates a new item, makes a new translation, I should say, then it should get reset. So if we have is saved here, then we set is saved to false. Okay, so two things we have to test here. One, that once we save the translation, this one actually updates the state. And then second, once we translate again, then this translate resets the state of this. So let's try a comment on what are the things that you would like to explore more. Let's save this translation. All right, this got updated. Right, I'll try this one more time. So when I do translate, this got reset. This translation seems... Oh, if you're a French speaker, let me know, because it seems like it does get cut off. That's interesting. Now let's load these translations for the user on the translations page. And we created the page, which would be in the translations folder. And we want this page only to load when user is signed in. And to ensure that this page is like protected from public or not signed in users, we can update our middleware configuration for clerk. By default, clerk does not protect any like routes for the like pages. And we can create a function that would match to the routes that we're trying to protect. So that would be create route matcher that would be imported from the server. And then we are going to create this function is protected route. And that would equal to create route matcher. In an array, this is where we list our routes. So it would be translations and any of the files that go inside here. Because in Next.js, it's not just the folder name, it is also, we have page.js inside. Okay, so that would be it for now. That would be like protected, create route matcher. And the way we would update this clerk middleware, that is what gets exported, is we'll create an async function. We can take in auth as an argument and a request. And an if statement, if is protected route. And we pass in request as an argument, then we await and call the protect function of the auth object. And that's pretty much it. We can also notice that this always runs for the API routes, which means that if we were to place, I think we have translate function here, or transcribe function, then if the user is not logged in, it would not run. So we can actually comment this out. All right. Now going back to the translations, we already have Neon imported here and we're making a SQL query, but instead of select version, what we're going to do is has a query where we're going to select from translations and where it matches user ID. The user ID we would not use the use user hook, which is for client components. This one, since we created in the app directory and we haven't defined it as use client, this is a server component. So we would access it the same way as we are accessing it on a like a server action. So auth, then we need to get the user ID first. We don't need the redirect to sign in. And we're gonna pass this user ID to get data. Then inside get data, let's access this and update the query to be looking something like this. So select, and let's select all the fields. So all from translations. And then we define a where condition, user ID, as we name the field inside the table like this. Then we do the pass the value. I am going to remove this where we get back the version and just return response. And I think it would come back as an array, so let's map those out. Here we can do json.stringify for now just to examine the values. We could also do this in a console or in a brackets, then it would just print out like literal text from here. Saving that. Let's navigate to the translations. Okay, so we got the data. I would see what is there. Oh yeah, we need to have a unique key. Let's do index for now. So that's our data with all the fields that are coming in, and we can sort them by the languages. We don't have to parse this data necessarily on the client side. It would be better just to take the data and display it. We could use the group by clause in SQL to group them based on the source language and the target language. For the where condition, we are going to add group by. Group by, we're gonna get an error though because it needs some kind of aggregate function. So to list out the data, it would group it, but it still needs to map out the data, right? So if we were to, instead of selecting everything here, I'm gonna do a source language, target language, so these fields, they would be grouped, and then we are going to use count, and it would return the amount of data we have that contains same source language and target language, amount of items. So translation and it would create in the data that it returns, not in our database, it would create a new field, translation count. Okay, so now we did get data as a row, they're grouped, and it shows how many items we have per this pair. Now we do want to also return an array of all the source text and translated text, so we are going to use aggregation function, and basically what we would do is we would create arrays inside array agg. So we indicate the field that would be source text, and we also want this displayed as source text. Translated text, we also display this as translated texts. So we have this array of source text that we can map out, and also that of translated texts. Work on the UI to display this area properly, and starting off with, let's see where we have our layout. So we don't have a layout yet for this page. And we can create one. That would be, we could do a could do the stylings in the page, but it is a better practice to do it in layout if it's just generally about like the page layout. And just like we have in the other layout where we can take the children and display it inside, we're gonna do the same here. Alright, this is where the children will go, and we'll have a class name. This would be minimum height screen. Background gray, let's do 100 and add some padding. We will add another div, and this would be for container margin auto. Then we add a padding of 4. All right, now inside the page we are going to add, let's do a header that says what this page is about. We can do translations. Let's see, so it's here, and then we're gonna later on update this header, but so for now, let's do class name for the header here. Text, larger, like 3XL. Font, let's do bold. Text, center. Margin at the bottom 8, and text, we're gonna do gray 800. All right, then we will create a grid to display this translation. So this would go, doesn't get added. Gap 4, by default, we're gonna have 1 column per row, on larger screens 2. And then instead of this, let's create a separate component to handle the logic, because right now we're just displaying text and it doesn't even fit. So new file, translation card.js. Export constant translation card. So we're gonna take in the grouped translations. So each card will display each group. And first, let's just display like the source language and the target language. Creating a main div container. Background, we're gonna make it right. Rounded, let's do large. Shadow and the padding for height, we're going to do full flex and flex direction column. All right, then a different section. The first section where we're gonna actually display those languages. So this would be, instead here, we're gonna show the items side by side. So we're not gonna add flex column anymore. Items, although would be centered, and justify center. Then we have margin at the bottom 4. So we have to make sure that the group does come with the source language before we display that. And a target language. If not, we can show unknown languages, but because that shouldn't usually be the case. Because we don't have anything here. Okay. And instead of displaying just the source language, we can do group source language to uppercase. Adding some margin, text gray 500. And we will duplicate this and instead display the target language. All right, let's import the translation card. And instead of the item, this would be group. We are going to remove this, change this to translation card. We still need the unique keys, and we are going to pass group as a group because they have the same name. All right. Here we have English to Spanish, English to French, and then those unknown languages that are like null. Let's add an arrow here, an icon from Lucid React. And place that in between those languages, so it would go here. Cool. That looks good, matches the text. Now let's also display a country flag and manually add the country flag. So language to country, that equals 2, and then for all the flags which we have English, Spanish, and French. If there's more added on the database, we would have to add more, and we can English flag. All right, France. We can put this in quotes because technically these are like texts. And then display them here. So we can take the language to country object and pass in group source language. Let's see how that looks like first. Okay, and Same thing here after the arrow. And target language. Actually, let's switch the places for this. And I'll try to make the text bigger, so let's do cool. Let's map out the translations. I'm gonna minimize this div as we are going to add another div for those content itself. A class name. This would be flex grow space y and 4. Group dot source text. We'll have source text and an index. Inside here would be a the main name first that would contain key. We can have index too, but let's take, because we're gonna have same index for the other ones. Oh, I guess it doesn't. For the other groups, right? So if we start here, first translation, second, third, other groups would also have first and second, third translation. But to make this unique, we can add as a prefix like the source language itself. I guess, and a target language, because we can have different groups with the same source language, like from English to Spanish and then from English to French. Okay, so we have the main div container. Here we're going to have another 2 divs, source text and the translation text. Oh, I'm not getting the same. Separating these two, I'm going to add the margin at the bottom for the first one. A small header that says source and a paragraph that would display source text, or if the text is not there, then you would say by default no source text available. I misspelled the source. Header for the translations and a paragraph. Actually, we do need a source text and an index here as well. And starts with the group though. So if it's not there, no translation available. Oh, it's translated. Okay, so here are our translations. Let's, for the purposes of separating translation one translation from another, add like a border and some styling here. Starting off with this one, so here's our key, and then we can add a class name. It would be border at the bottom, padding at the bottom would be 4, and then on the last item we don't want to have a border because the card already has a border. Some styling for the header so we can differentiate it from the paragraph. Font would be semi-bold, margin at the bottom would be 1, and I'll do the same for the other header for translations. I see, I do have a typo here. Okay, so that looks better. And let's update the header now. So we're gonna move this button on the right side and then have something like a logo here. For logo, we are going to use this icon to indicate translations. And I will go back to our main page, actually maybe in the layout. Yeah, is where we have the header, so let's import actually let's do this as a separate component. Paste the import statement for the icon here. Copying the logic for the clerk and this buttons itself, so also going to remove this. Place it in a header here. And before we make any changes, let's import this. Alright, so nothing should visibly change right now, but we can start making the changes first with the main header tag. Class name would be, we're gonna make this sticky, so it sticks at the top. Set the position on the x-axis 0, then from the top also 0. Let's set the highest index, so make sure it's never covered, width would be full. Transition, I don't think it will ever change because we don't have that much content, but we can add for this, let's do background white, although with a 20% opacity, and backdrop blur, I will do small. Alright, I will wrap also this in a separate div, width of which would be full. Max width screen Excel. Actually, we don't need the width full in that case. Add some padding, larger padding for larger screens. We're gonna do this one 20. Also relative, margin auto, so it's centered, and border at the bottom. What is the error? Okay, class name. And another div for the items inside the one that has the border itself. So class flex height, let's set it to 14. Item center. And justify between. All right, and then if we add inside a book icon, then this moved on the right side. And if we do this, we can see that it remains like a certain width. And let's set this max width also on the translations page. So if we go to here, or actually let's do layout. Then this too would have the same width. I am going to make this bigger class name. So for that, we set the width and height. Maybe like also 7. Okay, and we can add some color to it. So let's see, what are the options? Green, we can do maybe red or amber. Okay. And if we log out right now, we should get redirected to the main page, and also we can see how the sign in button looks like. So let's update that as well. So instead of just having a component, we're gonna create a component with a child, and in here we're gonna add a button that says sign in. Oh, just the button tag. Background, should we do also maybe amber 900? Then text, let's do white. Padding on the sides, rounded medium. Is logged in, let's add a button that would take them to, it will be a link and take them to their translations page. I'm going to log in again. So signed in, link, href, that would be translations, and the text would say my translations. Let's do margin on the right side too. We can do border rounded medium. Oh, and we need to import link from Next.js. Oh, it's a default import. Okay, and then we add paddings in here. We also wrap this in the same div so that they show up right next to each other. Okay, now we can update. This could serve as our landing page and update to have like a hero section that explains what the app does, and then have this translator here. First, I'm actually going to update the background color on the main layout that we have. And going back to the page, so this is the grid that contains the translator, right? We're gonna add another, actually not a div even, like let's do section. And inside the section first, we'll do like a header and a small description below. So for the header, we'll have h1 and translate like a text that explains what it does. We can do translate with and then put a span over ease and then make this different color. So let's do class name, text, and since we're using Amber, let's stay within that, maybe this one. Okay, that looks okay. I'll update the class name of this, and we'll set text to 4XL as well as font. We'll do extra bold, tracking tight. So for the other text color, let's do gray 900 and larger text for larger screens. Okay, so now moving this to be better aligned, update this text to be center. And margin at the bottom, so we have some space here. And for space in between the header and the section, let's update the section class name for that. We're gonna add a lot of padding at the top, at the bottom, so let's do 20. On the sides 4, then 6 on larger screens. And max width, I'll do 7XL, and this would be centered if we set the margin to auto. Cool, and after the header, we are going to have a paragraph. I'm gonna paste some text in here, just like a generic text for the translator, then add class names. Let's save this first so we can see how they look like. Okay, so we need some margin at the top. Let's do max width medium, also centered. Text in terms of size, let's do base. And this would be like a lighter than our header, so I think 500 is good. Some breakpoint text sizes, medium, margin top 5. Extra large. And as for the sizing, max width, let's do 3XL. Cool, now let's wrap our translator into like a card and do background white, shadow XL, rounded large, padding 6, 3XL, and I will replace this with div. And also for this one, we have the fixed size, so let's remove that. And to update styling, I think the text areas have a fixed width set, so I will remove those. Also, the parent container, since we have item center, we can do instead start so that it moves up. And the padding, we are gonna make this smaller. I think if we do 6 gap 4, padding at the bottom, let's do 8. And just overall padding, I think 2 should be sufficient. All right, even this. And somewhere in here we have minimum height screen, so let's remove that as well. And I will make the width of this container for the form itself full. Full to both like this parent container, and then do the same for the form. We would get like a bigger text areas that would automatically adjust. So like this way. And one more thing that I'll add here is when we navigate to my translations page, if let's say if we wanted to go back to other homepage or create a new translation, here we're still seeing my translations button. So let's update this instead when we are on translations route to show a button to create a new translation or translate new. So to identify which path we are on that we are going to need in our header, we're going to use path name, but use path name can only be used on the client side since the server header is a server component right now and server doesn't have access to the routing. So if we even tried to add this in here, we're gonna get an error on our component. But to fix this, we can create a client component that we're going to import here, and then based on that, inside the client component, we're going to determine the logic. So new file, and let's just call it like a menu button. Well, first I'm going to make it client. Then I'll import the use path name, export constant menu button. We also need a link from next link. So this button, not this one, the My Translations. And let's console log the path name. I'm going to save this. I will import, I'm gonna delete this and import I think they're on the same folder, yeah. And replace what we have here. Right, and since this will console log, we can open up a console and see that it is translation. So if path name equals to translations, then we're gonna display a different link. It would be translate new, and it would just redirect to the home page, as that's where we have the translations. Okay, so let's go back. We have translate new, my translations. Form user needs to enter translation here, so we will make this text area, which I forgot to make. It would be required. So if I try to translate now, it would ask me to fill out this field first. And the final part in this tutorial would be deploying the project. And to deploy the project, first I would upload it to the GitHub. I already created a repo, so I would commit all the changes that I have not committed and pushed yet. And once that is up there, we are going to use Vercel to deploy. Inside the Vercel, in the dashboard, we go to add new project. We select the GitHub repository that contains the code of the project. Click import, and in here, only thing that we would need to change, we're not gonna update the settings, though. Make sure just though that the framework is set as Next.js, and inside environment variables, we are going to go inside our .env file and copy all the values here. So the name of the variable would go inside key field and the value itself would go in the value. Once those are copied over, we click deploy, and it should take not longer than a few minutes. And once this is deployed, we can visit the production version and test it out. This one would also get, if you're logged into Vercel, you'd have this other options of like comments, inbox, and then this toolbar, which would, if you were to share this link, would not be viewed by your visitors, just by you. And let's do a quick test. And for the sign in, you wouldn't have to create an account because we use the same keys and also the database as we used in the production. But for best practices, I would recommend creating a separate database and also a separate clerk instance for the productions, because once again, this is using development keys. That would be it for the tutorial. If you enjoyed it and learned some new things, make sure to subscribe, like, and comment, and I will see you in the next video. Don't forget to check that one out. I'll be building out AI language learning app and also with more advanced features than we saw in this one.